the user controls load event. So let me add the load event here, and there we go. We have a load event now, and in this load event we'll call load member info. Now the reason it's important that we call this in the load event is that you need to understand in the cycle of page processing back on the server when the view state is returned back to the user controls and when it is saved. And an important distinction is that the view state information that already exists is not available in the init method for the page, or in this case the user control. So that if we had put this load member info method in the page underscore init for the user control, then the view state information would not be available and we wouldn't get the behavior that we expected. However, the page load event does occur after the view state information has been restored to the view state property or object in the user control, so that's a good place to load this member info. Now the last thing we need to do is put our user control on the default ASPX page. So we'll switch over to that, go into the design view, and I'm going to simply drag and drop the user info ASCX user control onto our page. Then the last thing we need on our page is to have a post back. So to do that, what I'm going to do is add a button to the page. So let me go up into the standard controls, we'll get a button and drag and drop that onto our page. Now let's test out our page, and before I run it, let me go over to the code behind for our member info user control and set two breakpoints. The first on line 10, which is where we're simulating the load of the member data from the database and storing it in the view state. And the second one I'll put here on line 17, which is where we're assigning the view state information to the various labels that are on the page or in the user control. So now let's start up the web page and see what happens. And as we might expect, the first time the page is loading, we hit the breakpoint where we're storing the member information from the database into the view state. We'll let it run from here. Next, it stops down here where we're loading the view state information into the labels on the page. We'll let it run along, and our page does display the member related information. So that's what happens the first time the page is loaded. Now let's click the button to have a post back of this page and see what happens. We'll click the button, and notice this time we bypassed the step where we're loading the information into the view state, because our test here of whether or not the member name item is in existence in the view state is true, because it is there. So we skip the if clause of the data loading, go right down to loading the information from the view state. And this will go along and load the information from each of the items in our view state. We'll let it run from here by I'll press F5, and here we have the information displayed on the page again, but this time, because it was a post back, that information came directly from the view state object. So let me shut down the page, and in this first pass at using the view state, what we were doing is storing strings in each item of the view state, one item per string value. There's another approach that I want to show you that might be more powerful and more versatile in your particular situation. So we'll do a simple demonstration here. What I'm going to do is we're going to add a class to our website project, and we're going to call this class member, add it to the app code folder, and inside of member we're going to create public properties that represent the different values that we had over in the code behind. So the first one I'm going to do is, and actually what I'm going to do is create a private internal variable to store each of these values. So our first one we're going to do is the underscore member name, as a string. Then we're going to do private underscore last visit as a string. And next one, create, we'll call total budget. And then we'll create one called items purchased. And we're actually going to, that's a total number of items, so we're going to make that an integer. And the total budget, we'll make that an integer as well. And the last thing is the year-to-date purchase, so we'll say private underscore YTD purchase, and we'll just make that an integer. Now let's create a public property for each of these. So we'll go public property, member name as string, and we will return underscore member name, and we'll set underscore member name equals value. And the next property will be last visit. We're going to go along and create properties for each of these. So we'll say public property, and we'll call it last visit as a string. We'll return underscore last visit, set underscore last visit. Next one is total budget. As an integer, we'll return underscore total budget. We'll set total budget. And we have items purchased to do next, so we'll say public property, items purchased as an integer. And we'll return underscore items purchased, set it. And I think you'll probably recognize where we're going to go with this is we're going to actually store this object instead of the individual values. So the last property is year-to-date purchase as an integer, and we return YTD purchase and set it. So now we have an object that represents the values that we have for the member, and we forgot to set a value up here. Let me just do that. And we'll check to make sure the other ones look good, which they do. So now we can go back over to our class, and instead of setting the individual values, we'll just use the member object that we created. So what I'm going to do is just comment out this part and this part so that when you download the code, you'll have that to look at. So what we'll do here is first we'll create an instance of our member object. So we'll say dim member as instance of the member equals new member. Now we'll set each of its properties. So we'll say member.member name equal to, well, this time we use some different values. So we'll say Jane Doe. We'll say member dot last visit equal to 207. Say member dot total budget equal to